Hi, welcome to Almost Cooperstown.
I'm Mark.
And this is Gordon, and we love talking about baseball.
Episode 10, Best Fan Bases in Baseball. So the idea for this show came when I was listening to MLB Network, Steve Phillips and Eduardo Perez's great morning show on MLB Network. It's not called Morning Drive, but I can't remember the name of it. And they were talking about an article that came out in Forbes on July 1st that actually ranked the top fan bases in baseball. And they were talking about it, and I was listening, and I thought, oh, that would be interesting. And I didn't necessarily agree with everything that they said.
I mean, in looking at the article was pretty interesting because they actually laid out their methodology for it, and it was, I mean, it makes sense. I think there's definitely some arguments made for, like, hey, you're probably not tracking certain things that you should be tracking because you're not necessarily, like, I think certain things they really valued probably aren't as valuable for tracking how engaged a fan base is necessarily. But I think some of the stuff they were tracking was really good.
What would be something out of?
Well, I think a lot of the ticket sales stuff is not necessarily endemic of how, because for certain teams, like for the Mets, any team that's in a major city, especially with secondhand ticket sales, you don't necessarily know how many of those ticket sales are going to truly dedicated fans and not just somebody that was around that wanted to watch a baseball game. So I think if you're talking about a fan base, do those people count when you're talking about a fan base?
That's an interesting point. I didn't think of it that way in terms of the, who's buying the tickets. I thought their thoughts on social media engagement was interesting because I think it's important that we see how that transitions into being an important asset. But if you're over a certain age, chances of you being on social media or being active doesn't make you less of a baseball fan or not as good. So I think that can be overweighted in some cases.
At the same time, it's still going to give you a representation of those teams' fan bases, which one of the younger part of their fan bases are more engaged. Like, I mean, I went through and I was pulling up all the different, like, number of posts that were coming up, like subscribers to each team's individual subreddits. And, it makes sense when the Marlins are around 10,000 people and the Yankees are at 40,000 people.
Yeah, and not just because New York is bigger than Miami necessarily.
Exactly. No, those are two different fan bases, so you're going to see different numbers coming in from them. Same when you're looking at the actual activity that's going on with those. And then you'd see some that are kind of surprises because they don't have a ton of people, but the people that they have are super dedicated fans.
Well, and hopefully they're fans who are going to not only buy tickets sometimes, if not all the time, but, watch the games and subscribe to wherever you can to MLB things and spend some money in addition to just being a fan of the team. But that's where the fans come from, right? It's going to be from the younger fans. So getting them involved in social media and engaged in about the team is something that's going to happen for teams to survive in the future.
Certainly. And you're going to also see, I think one of the things you can also see is like with apparel buying. I think that's actually something to look into because where you're going to see a lot of that is with people that aren't, you get those teams that have reaches outside of their area. You get, the team like the Giants, who, yes, they have a pretty big fan base in San Francisco, but their fan base is really, it's not concentrated. It's all over the US. And you're going to see that because even players, a guy like Buster Posey is still going to be in the top 20 for jersey sales like he was last year. Because there's so many Giants fans.
100%. And if you think, we talk about the modern era of baseball from, let's say, 1901 till the present. So it's about 120 years almost. And up until 1958, all the teams didn't go any further west than St. Louis. And then in 1958, you had the Giants. So St. Louis owned the West, Chicago to a degree as well, in a big way. And so St. Louis's fan base has had a chance to grow, much longer than just about any other teams to sort of conquer those Western, areas that there were no other teams. And so you were by default a Cardinal fan for a long time.
At the same time, the number of people that are going to be being fans operating under that world premise reduces every single year.
Like, you mean they're dead?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Unfortunately, but it's just like, think about it. The number of people that were living in the western states prior to 1958 that were baseball fans that adopted the Cardinals because they were a furthest west team, like that's a self-shrinking group every year.
Yeah, but look, the Dodgers played in Wrigley Field in Los Angeles at one point, so that's a nod to their association with Chicago at that time, which...
And it's not that there's not an association.
There's a connection.
But you're not getting anything new with that connection.
No.
There are probably very few people that are growing up in Palm Springs, California that are going to be Cardinal fans.
I have to agree with you there. So 30 teams, and we're going to end up by picking each of our own top 10, which just means there's going to be 20 franchises that are going to be mad at us for not picking them as their favorite team.
And this is certainly not some kind of like indictment on those fan bases as to like their actual fandom or like, this is more of like a data and statistical analysis. And some of that just comes from like these teams are just bigger. Like, unfortunately, as much as we don't like it, the Yankees have won 26 world championships.
27.
It makes a difference.
Somebody's going to write in and tell us if we say 26, we're going to hear about it.
Yeah, exactly. But that's the whole point. Is like, it doesn't matter. They're going to have a huge fan base because they win a lot. If you win a lot, it helps.
Well, and you said something that I'm really biased on in history. So I have a bottom three, right? Two of the three I think are no-brainers that, and they're both the Florida teams, right? The Florida Marlins. And I feel bad for Florida Marlins fans because, number one, they've won 2 championships. They haven't even been around 20 years yet. I mean, that should be cause for a crazy fan base, except they do the same thing every time they won and just destroy the team.
And it's like, I can't blame. They have like the lowest attendance, the lowest like online participation. Like, I can't really blame their
If you're going to be good on that team, you're going to be traded. How about you got Christian Yelich, Giancarlo Stanton, and Marcell Ozuna all in the same outfield. None of them play for the Marlins now. Are you kidding?
Like, I don't understand how you could expect. I don't understand how you could expect people to keep being a fan of that, because it's like, oh, we're gonna get excited for the next player that's gonna leave our team.
Now the next team, and you've seen a game at this stadium. That's one of the teams I haven't been to. Would be the Tampa Bay Rays.
Yes, I have been to Tropicana
That
Field.
is not. That is okay. They can't argue that they have a shot at being a top 10 fan base.
No, I mean, they're just really low attendance. They're not a particularly engaged fan base in terms of like the sheer number. Though I will say, when I was going through it, like on Reddit, they have game day threads for every single game that's being played. They actually have really good participation per the metric of people that are on that subreddit. So they get a lot of people talking on there, but it's a lot of the same people. You're not getting a huge reach.
You know what it is? Being good matters. So at any point in time, if you look back, sometime, there'll be different teams that might have been in anybody's top 10 fan bases. Some of that has to do with how the team's playing. So if you think about, the Rays, they're good now. That could engage their fans finally, by the way. And the ballpark they play in is just awful.
It's
So
dreadful
who
to
wants
get
to
to.
go
It's
there?
dreadful to watch a game there, and nobody goes. It's a ghost town when you're in there. Though they do show up for their playoff games.
Yeah, they do show up for the playoff games, and they're a good team this year.
That's a team that very much could be in the top 2 in the AL East.
So the other team I had is, and here's the thing, this team is a charter member of the American League, okay, as the Philadelphia Athletics. Okay, they moved to Kansas City, which a lot of people don't remember, in 1955 through 1967, and they didn't do anything when they were in Kansas City.
12 years is a short
Crazy
time.
Charlie Finley then took them to Oakland, where they won some championships, right? They won in 1989, and they won in 1972, 3, and 4. So they won 4 championships in Oakland. Okay, they won 5 when they were the Philadelphia Athletics way back at the beginning of the 20th century. So they've got 9 World Series and 15 World Series appearances. But that ballpark, those fans, they're engaged in social media. Are the A's a top 10 fan base?
No, I mean, I can't ever remember watching a SportsCenter highlight reel where I saw Kauffman's. What's the stadium there?
The A's are the Oakland Alameda County Coliseum.
Yeah. At the Oakland Coliseum. I can't ever remember seeing a highlight where they were like people in the stands.
That's so true. That's true. Now, I happened to look up. The Oakland has a ballpark. It's called the Oakland Ballpark that is going to be built in 2023. I think the financing's been done for this. It will be the first new ballpark that the Athletics have played in since 1901.
That's going to help, because I have to imagine playing in this ancient stadium that from what I've seen on TV, it does not appear to be a particularly attractive place.
The mausoleum, almost,
Yeah,
not the Coliseum.
So I gotta feel that getting out of that stadium will be a huge help to them, and they're turning it around too. They're a very dangerous team this year.
They just, it's frustrating, right? Because they're the little team that could every single year. Billy Beane having to work some magic and do that because he's got no budget to make a team. And somehow, Moneyball wise, they compete and they're in it and they compete, late in the season, and they even make the playoffs. They never quite get there to the World Series anymore.
Yeah, and I think outside of those 3, even the Athletics are on the edge.
Yeah, I'm being a little harsh.
It's more so because of the history behind that team, and I gotta get that. I think really everybody outside the Marlins and the Rays, which is just, it's not even really a function of those teams' fault or fans' fault or anything. Like, nobody can really blame them. Like everybody else, you could at least make a pretty passing argument for belonging in the top 10,
Yeah,
or at least on the fringe edges of it.
I'm not sure I feel about the Nats, although the Nationals fans are gonna have an argument with me. They haven't been around that long either, and I think longevity does have something.
I think, yeah, it's hard to almost rank them because they've not been around long.
Although the Nats were the Montreal Expos.
But I feel like those are two different fan bases.
But it's one franchise. So when you count their world championships, and by the way, they still have one.
Yeah, which they won as a national. So it's not like you're bringing in some kind of story.
There's no Expo championships. So of course, they'll always talk about 1981, the year that could have been. Anyway, there are a bunch of teams, and we can kind of run through them. And it's interesting to look at their history. Again, a team, original charter member of the American League, 1901, the White Stockings, the White Sox. They have 3 World Series championships. They have 6 appearances in 120 years. I'm not sure that's that good.
I mean, better than a lot of teams.
I think of all the teams that were founded in 1901, I think they're right at the bottom of wins and world championships and appearances in the World Series. And the White Sox, they play in a town where the beloved Cubs and North Side, South Side, you can get into all that.
That's always going to hurt you if you're the little brother team, which we are well aware of what it's like to be.
True.
It's just you're always going to be playing from behind, especially when you weren't the original. Now, what's interesting is kind of the next 2 teams I want to talk about are 2 teams I think you really could have made a convincing argument for bottom 3 or bottom 2 that they kind of could have been right there alongside the Rays and the Marlins, which are the San Diego Padres and the Seattle Mariners.
Yeah.
But I know how dedicated that Seattle fan base is. They love that team.
And Seattle draws from, Western Canada, right? You go to Vancouver, there's a lot of baseball fans. Although Toronto Blue Jays would tell you they're Canada's team, I think there's a lot of Mariner fans up in that northwest corner.
Certainly. But I think it's just like, there's just something of this more so for the Mariners. I think for the Padres, you'd have to make an argument to convince me of this because I don't see it. They don't have good attendance numbers.
Petco Park is a beautiful park.
And it was definitely crowded there on the day Bartolo hit that home run.
But Seattle with no World Series appearances, no chance. It's kind of hard to call a team in the top 10 fan base if they've never won.
But how is that? I guess to me at the same time, how is that the fan base's fault?
It's not the fan base's fault, but it certainly doesn't create any long-standing passion.
Well, what you don't have is you don't have those October memories.
Right.
And you don't have that history that's passed down as a fandom of those moments. You don't have
What's the Mariner playoff highlight? The 95 win against the Yankees in the divisional series. I mean,
it's not the same as just all of the classic baseball, and that's not that fan base's fault. But when you're talking about it has to be something that's considered it, which really isn't fair.
Yeah, I agree with that. But they didn't win. They haven't been to the World Series. The Padres have been in 2 World Series, lost them both. They've got those. They were founded in 1969 as an expansion team with the Expos, so those 2 teams came into the league. And they've got a good team this year. They've got a new ballpark. I'd love to see San Diego come out, support that team, and get passionate. I think they need to win. They need to make the World Series or better in order to really ignite that fan base. Mm-hmm. But they're not a top 10.
And then it's just there's some teams I think you get into, you get the Pirates, where it's just and the Orioles, where you hear 2 historic teams that have just they've fallen on super hard times. I mean, I can't remember there have been a couple spare seasons I can remember throughout growing up, in my 30 plus years now of being a baseball fan, but I mean, those were aberrations for those teams outside of what was mostly a lot of basement dwelling.
Right. They won in 79, so certainly nothing you'll hear about with Willie Stargell and We Are Family, and that was a really fun time for the Pirates. They won in 1971, and they won in 1960, the Mazeroski home run. But they, in their history, they have 5 World Series championships. They've been around since 1901 and 9 appearances. So I just don't think the Pirates support their team, to the degree.
But at the same time,
and what a ballpark, by the way.
Oh, it's a beautiful.
I've been to the ballpark. I went there to watch a baseball game. Instead, I watched a hockey game because it rained. The Pirates got rained out, and they put on the Stanley Cup final between the Penguins and the San Jose Sharks. That's what happens when I go to watch a game in Pittsburgh.
Of course.
So a team that. I don't have in there, and I don't know how you feel about this. We both hate them, and they've moved around a lot. They were founded in 1871 as the Boston Braves, and remember we talked about how they became the Boston Bees. They just decided that they were a bad team, and so we want to change the karma, and we're going to call ourselves the Bees for 6 years, 1936 to 41. Then they changed them back to the Braves.
I just feel like bees are inherently like unfortunately, it's just like the Boston Bees is not a name that inspires fear in anybody.
They moved to
You're a
Milwaukee for 1953 to 65, so they're there for 13 years. They had Hank Aaron obviously join the team then, but they won a World Series championship in 1957, I think, and then they moved to Atlanta. So they've got a long history. They've moved around a lot. They've appeared in they have 3 World Series championships. They've been in 17 World Series, so that would make it a record of 3-14 in World Series. I don't know if I'm going to penalize them, but
certainly you can't penalize the fan base. Again, you're bringing up team performance for the fan base.
But here's the thing: they have not sold out 12 of their playoff games since like 1990 or something.
And I think it's just funny because you don't have them in your top 10.
No,
do you?
I don't.
And as much as it pains me, I do.
Ooh. Why?
They blow out every other metric. In terms of fan engagement, they beat them. Certainly, you're going to say, well, what about they have the highest attendance per game. Outside of them and the Phillies have the highest attendance per game in the National League East. They have the most engaged fans on Reddit and social media and Twitter. They have Ronald Acuna Jr. was the highest selling jersey last season, I believe, or one of them.
Right. Wow. What a player.
And so it was just like, outside of they didn't sell out a couple playoff games, which is a pretty big sin.
It's 12.
12.
Okay. You can't not sell out playoff games and be a top 10 franchise. They
hit
another 40 years before I'll believe in that.
Yeah. They hit every box.
Yeah, I hear you. Well, we don't agree on that one. Where are you on the Brewers, which I also have not in my top 10? And the Brewers came into the league actually in 1969 also as the Seattle Pilots. They lasted one whole year before somehow they determined that baseball wasn't going to work in Seattle at that time. And then they moved to Milwaukee, became the Brewers. And then they were in the American League for a long time. And then they decided in 1998 to move to the National League when the Astros flipped over.
Well, it's like, interestingly, I put a bunch of teams kind of in this category right here. So like if I was going to put them on like a team like the Nats, the Brewers, the Astros, and the D-backs. If we're going to kind of talk about all those teams together, they're all, in terms of where they are, certainly relatively recent teams outside of the Brewers. They're all on the newer side, and they're all teams that are growing their fan bases, and it all helps that they're all improving right now. If any one of those teams really breaks out and has a crazy good stretch, they might become one of the next big fan bases in baseball because it's a growing thing. Like this is definitely something that's growing in these places that never had great teams before. Like Arizona had 0-1, but they pretty much kind of disappeared after that.
I think the Brewers, they went to the World Series in 1982 and they lost to the Cardinals. That is their only World Series appearance. So for me, you don't have those members. I know their fans are passionate. I've been in their ballparks.
But again, you keep bringing up how many World Series that they've been in, like it has something to do with the fan base.
I guess the fan base is, to me, it's affected by having those memories of the wins that allow you to talk about those years.
But that's just team history. That's not fan base.
That is team history, but it's part of it, to your fan base's passion.
That's what grows your fan base. But it's like it's the same way. Like it's like if you have a team like the Dodgers, who I think we would both say are in our top 10. Yeah. I'll say it. My Dodgers are in my top 10. Certainly, they're a gigantic fan base. That fan base is huge. But I don't think that fan base subsists of two groups of Brooklyn Dodgers fans from the Stone Age and current LA Dodger fans. It's mostly just LA Dodger fans with a couple of people remaining around still talking about the Brooklyn team.
Well, you talked about it before, and you're right. So the size of the market in the city is important. So Milwaukee should get credit for being what would be a smaller market team. They fill that ballpark up. They're passionate about it. Compared to a team like the Dodgers or even the Mets and Yankees, where you've got 8 million people in New York and 5 million people in Los Angeles, you're going to get a lot more chances to have fans.
And then I think you kind of end up, which is where you get those teams that are the historical teams that kind of end up beating out right now, at least probably for a lot of people, like the newer group of teams like the Royals, the Indians, like these teams that have been around for a while and existed, the Tigers.
Yeah, and the Royals, that's a good one because the Royals also came in the league in 1969 in that same expansion push. And they've got 2 World Series titles and 4 World Series appearances in their history, which is okay, pretty good. There's not a lot around Kansas City to draw away from, so their fans are passionate about the Royals. There's not other teams. St. Louis is on the other side of the state, and there certainly ain't going to be Cardinal fans.
And that's hard when the Cardinals have had so much more comparative success. But I think success is important because you see teams like the Indians, teams like the Astros, they have a chance right now to reinvigorate their fan base and really grow it because they're good. Granted, I think it's hard for the Astros because I think it's hard to be an outspoken Astro fan right now. Just kind of in general.
You think the Astro fans should just be quiet right now?
And I don't think they should be quiet. I just think it's hard to be a loud and proud Astro fan because every other baseball fan is going to go, yeah, but you cheated.
You know, they came in the league with the Mets in 1962 as the Colt 45s, and they moved to the Astrodome in 65. They only have the 1 World Series title, which surprised me, although they still have made 3 World Series. I think, if I think about it, they're the only team to play in the World Series for both leagues.
Which is a weird thing when you think about it.
Right.
I think it's like them, then you get like as much as I would want them to be. Our Mets aren't a top 10 fan base, unfortunately, because of who else exists in our city. That just really hurts you.
Well, and again, the Mets have not had a tremendous amount of success in recent years. It's, the 86 is the last championship. Sure, they made the World Series in 2015, but, just a couple of appearances, mismanagement and the ownership and the fans are kind of disgusted with management, and that affects your fan base's passion.
And I think it's also the country. The majority of the country, in terms of just population, is situated on the East Coast. So I think you just run into problems for teams like the Angels and the Rangers, where you're competing against multiple teams in your own state, for one, and there's just less people there to begin with.
Like being a White Sox fan, you were saying too.
It's just harder. It's just harder to match when you get up to the top 10, the historical thing that these teams have been around for, these historic tapestries to be around for them. And where they're located just makes it hard to beat them. It makes it unlikely for those teams to ever kind of drop out, certainly.
So the Angels, and they're an interesting franchise, they have 1 World Series appearance and 1 World Series championship. They came in the league in 1961 with the Twins as the LA Angels, and then they changed to the California Angels in 1965. They became the Anaheim Angels in 1997, and then the Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim from 2005 to 2015. Finally, they went back to the LA Angels in 2016. That's a lot of moving around.
Yeah, they moved around, which makes it hard.
They never go anywhere. They're playing in the same ballpark.
Yeah, they're just kind of bouncing between 2 different cities.
I'm saying they never moved. They were in Anaheim the whole time.
They keep
changing their name.
Weird.
So how do you have an engaged fan base when you can't even decide what your name is?
Yeah, because people are, it's certainly, and it's harder for us also, I think, sometimes as really invested baseball fans to remember what it's like to be like the casual fan. And to remember, like, oh, yeah, the Angels playing, I don't know, what Angels team, what are they called now? And you don't even remember and care at that point.
Where are they from? Are they from Anaheim? Are they from Los Angeles? I know, they're just the Angels. Mm-hmm. Or the Halos, as they like to call them out there sometimes. How about the D-backs? What's your take on the D-backs? They a top 10 franchise?
Yeah. I mean, I kind of already said it before when I was talking about them, in that just like, they exist in that group of new teams where they're still trying to grow their fan base. Like, it's hard for them because, one, outside of 2001, I can't really think of any year where you're really going like, oh, the D-backs. So it's not like they had any spooky run of teams where you could really talk about, oh, that years where they were really good. I think you just run into the problem where they, like the Nats, just haven't had enough time. Same with, like, a team I actually wanted to give a shout out for was the Rockies, because they're still a relatively newer franchise, but that is a dedicated fan base. They have crazy good attendance. They don't have the biggest participation online, but what they do have matches at a volume of any of the bigger fan bases, certainly. So they are engaged in an active fan base. They just haven't had a lot of success, so they haven't been able to reach that national level.
You said it again. So, 1 World Series appearance and no World Series victories. And the other teams you mentioned, Diamondbacks, 1 appearance, 1 win. Angels, 1 appearance, 1 win. Nationals, 1 appearance, 1 win. So I think these teams will get greater fan bases if they just win a couple more times, and then they'll get some passion because people travel, move around a lot, and that's how you grow your fan base in other areas of the country where you have backers of your team showing up in other cities to watch games and talk about games and whatnot. Okay, a team that I also would not have in my top 10, and they entered as the Washington Senators in 1961 because the original Washington Senators moved to Minnesota and became the Twins. So now you have the new Washington Senators that only last, again, another 11 years, and they go to Texas and become the Rangers. And they've been in 2 World Series consecutive years, and they didn't win either time. Mm-hmm. So they are... got a new ballpark that nobody can go to this year because of the coronavirus. I don't know much about Rangers fans, but they've been there long enough to think that they're certainly going to stay. I just don't ever see them traveling. I'm not aware of Ranger fans.
Again, I think we're getting to the point where we're just kind of saying the same things about the teams that just aren't, but they're not in the top 10. They haven't won a lot, and so they just don't have the same national reach that the top teams that have been around longer have.
Right. And again, had they won, like the Marlins had such a chance, right? Because they won twice in the year, and they
squandered that. And then you have the newer teams that are now having a bunch of good years in the 2000s. They have a chance to really become the next big franchises that people are going to be fans of. Because, like, look, there's a whole bunch of Chicago Bulls fans out there because there were kids that grew up during the 90s and the Bulls were the best team.
Right.
So if you win a whole bunch, you're going to get fans on a national level.
One team we talked about briefly, I think you mentioned them, and has an interesting history. The Baltimore Orioles, another charter member of the American League, became the St. Louis Browns. Actually, they were founded as the Milwaukee Brewers, and then they changed their name to the Orioles. Became the Browns, and then moved to Baltimore in 1954. They have been in 7 World Series over their history, and who remembers the Browns' appearances in the World Series? 3 World Series championships, 1966. 1970 and 1983, and Jim Palmer pitched on all 3 of those teams, which I think is just a great little trivia
to get
stat.
through the same guy in 3 different...
All the World Series in Baltimore, Jim Palmer was on the team, so apparently they have no chance unless he comes back.
I think they're near, but I think we talked about them earlier when we were talking about
Yards. You think
they've been around for a while, but it's just they haven't been good,
right?
And that they're like the Pirates. It's really hard to expect to have this extremely active and engaged fan base when for the most of the last 20 plus years you've been a bottom dweller in your division.
So I guess if you take the teams we're going to go to and talk about our top 10, if they went through an extended streak of not winning, they may drop out of their top 10 position.
Because there are some of them in the top 10, like the Yankees. We could say, starting off the top 10 with the Yankees, they went through an extended period of being pretty bad.
So let's do them in order.
You actually have a set order.
I kind of threw out an order just for fun. I don't.
Oh, okay.
I think it's pretty easy, just to call them out because it's our opinion. It doesn't really matter. So my number 10 team, top team, is the Toronto Blue Jays.
So I don't have a specific order, but I'll let you know if that team was in my top 10. And the Blue Jays were in my top 10.
And so I picked the Blue Jays because, as we said, they sort of represent Canada now. There's no other teams in Canada playing. Founded as an expansion team in 1977. 2 World Series appearances, 2 championships. That really energized that fan base, and it lasts till today. I mean, they still talk about Joe Carter's home run.
It's tough because we don't have TV numbers for them like we do for all the American teams, but in terms of online engagement, jersey sales, attendance, they're amazing. And
the Jays are.
And you know what? They're a team that gets a boost because everybody remembers that fan base the year Bautista hit the home run in the playoffs and how loud and crazy it was in that stadium. That's the kind of memory that people will have of that fan base and how dedicated they are.
And I think they
Getting a chance to show up on a big stage matters.
Right. And I think they were the first team to draw 3 million fans in a season, which they did for a number of years. In a smaller city. This wasn't New York. I mean, Toronto's a big city, but it's not like New York or LA. Okay, why don't you throw one then?
So the next team, one of the teams that I had, I think to go just down the list of starting to hit the list of obvious ones here. Yeah. We both had the Yankees, I'm assuming.
Yeah, 40 appearances in the World Series, 27 World Championships.
I feel like
40
it's really
World Series,
point,
40.
As much as I don't like Yankee fans,
that's a third of the World Series
because there are a billion of them. I mean, there's literally you go anywhere, you go all over the world, and you see Yankee freaking hats. But they're the Yankees. They belong on there. I don't think any baseball fan, unless you're getting into the subjectivity of the quality of the
By the way,
fan
Yankee
base.
fans, they were founded as the Baltimore Orioles, as a charter member of the American League in 01.
They're the kind of team that's proof that just because you have a bad stretch doesn't mean that the team fans are going to ban you, because they were terrible, right, for like a bunch of years.
They were bad in the 60s into the mid 70s until they won in 77, 78.
But they've had so much winning that fan base will never decrease. I think another team that pretty much everybody would have on there, the Cubs.
Yeah. Yeah, they're charter members of the National League, right? So, that impresses me. They've been around since 1876, and they've always been the Cubs.
And they,
I love
like
that.
another team, went through the longest stretch of misery.
But loving the lovable losers is what the Cubs were.
And both them and another top 10 fan base in the Red Sox went through those time periods where they didn't win anything. They weren't winning World Series. And those fans still showed up and sold out game after game. They bought all of the merchandise. There's some of the biggest team subreddits on Reddit. They have some of the highest engagement on Twitter. They're there's just no way they're not two of the biggest fan bases out there.
So the Red Sox, obviously founded as a charter member in 1901, 14 World Series appearances, 9 championships, and Boston is not anywhere near the size of Chicago or any of these seasons. Those fans support that team. I have them at number 2, actually, in my list.
Oh, yeah, they would definitely be up there.
Yeah.
And I think another team that we would both have on there, the St. Louis Cardinals.
They're my number 1.
I think as much as I don't like Cardinal fans because there's this holier than thou.
They're so knowledgeable.
They're so holier than thou.
They're passionate though. I love that about them.
They're so passionate. Oh my God, they refer to themselves as the best fans in baseball. There's just something so arrogant about that.
And Joe Buck and all that stuff that goes with it. So 19 World Series appearances, 11 World Series championships, founded in 1881 as the St. Louis Browns, or Brown Stockings, which is interesting. They were also called the Perfectos and renamed the Cardinals in 1900. And again, as I started the show talking about the Western expansion of the major leagues, the Cardinals just really capitalized on that, being the furthest west team for a long time.
And I think what's interesting is that, when I was going through my list right here, I have 2 teams from the NL East, one of which I believe you have and one of which you don't, obviously, because we already talked about them in the Braves. The other team I have is the Philadelphia Phillies.
Yeah, I have them too. And I just know how passionate Phillies fans are.
And they show up.
Yep.
They show up. Their attendance sale numbers. They beat the Mets in attendance. They beat the Mets in online engagement. What can you say? And they do it without having won. Did they win a World Series in the 2000s?
They did.
They did.
Yeah.
They won the 10 World Series?
That was no, I think it was 2008.
2008. Okay.
Or 2007 or 2008, right?
No, because 07 was the Red Sox beating the Rockies.
Then it was 08.
But wasn't 08 the year Rodriguez went nuts? That was 09. Okay.
That was 09. So they were also founded in 1883 as the Quakers, and the Phillies shortened it. They called them the Philadelphians, and finally became the Phillies in 1900. 1890. So they've been the Philadelphia Phillies. For some reason, I didn't realize that their history is that consistent for that long. They've been doing this for 130 years as the Phillies.
Yeah, and you're going to have a huge fan base.
Yeah,
when you
a
get
huge
that.
fan base. So absolutely think they belong there.
We've talked about the Dodgers already. We talked about the Giants.
Well, let's go back to the Dodgers. I won't talk about, we talked about their history and said that they had 17 years where they're called the Brooklyn Robins, even though they were the Dodgers, because the manager's name was Robinson. But they have 23 World Series appearances and 6 World Series championships. Ooh, that's tough.
But
by the way,
that doesn't have anything to do with the fan base.
The Giants.
You keep bringing up they only won 6 World Series, but that has nothing to do with the size. Like in terms of that's not an indictment of the fan base.
I'm not indicting the fans. Here's what I'm saying about that. So for years, the Dodgers couldn't get past the Yankees, right? They would lose every year in the World Series. So when they finally did in 1955 and win, again, just sort of energizes the franchise, and they leave Brooklyn not because the fans didn't support the team, because they couldn't get the stadium built, and the owner jumped ship and ran to California. So the fans were left standing in the lurch. The Brooklyn fans were very big-time fans. The Dodger fans are very big-time fans.
Yeah, and now it's an LA Dodger fan base.
And that's why I'm just saying that their passion was born sort of out of being the lovable losers, not being able to get over that, wait till next year. And so that made their fan base even more passionate because they were so together and we're going to win one of these years.
Oh, okay, see, now that's an actual...
What I'm saying.
But that's an actual point you're making now. Up until this point, you're just going, they only made 6 World Series.
Well, I just think it's interesting when you think about a team that has a storied history like the Dodgers to only have won won 6 world championships. I would have sworn they won more.
Well, and that's certainly a fair point. I just don't think it's very important to the discussion of whether or not they're one of the top 10 fan bases in baseball.
Well, by the way, the Giants have also 23 appearances in the World Series, and they've got 8. So
They're not, but they're super helped because they went on that crazy streak, winning in 10, 12, and 14.
Right.
That makes a big help when you're trying to build your fan base in the current era. You're going to have a bunch of fans because of that.
They were founded as the New York Gothams. I love that. The New York Gothams, it sounds like the natural kind of thing. 1883, and they became the Giants in 1885. So the history again, and going back to Christy Matthews. See, I love the idea if you can connect the franchise back to its earliest days. You don't see the value of that nearly as much as I do.
I think it's interesting. I just don't think it has anything to do with the argument we're trying to have here.
Well, I don't know if it's the
debate
argument,
we're having.
Yeah. But we both agree the Giants belong,
Certainly
in the top 10. So I think I only have one more we haven't talked about, and that is the Detroit Tigers.
You have the Detroit Tigers. I do not have the Tigers. I actually have their brethren in the AL Central, though. The Minnesota Twins.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay. I could argue the Twins, too. Yeah.
The Twins, crazy good attendance numbers. They have, I think, the highest or second highest subreddit count on Reddit, which shocked me, and some of the highest engagement. They don't have amazing jersey sales, but I don't really feel like there's been one guy that you would elevate above all the others on their roster that would drive those kinds of jersey sales. Like, they thought Buxton might be him, but he really hasn't turned into that type of player. No. And so when you kind of get it done as a team, it's hard for any one guy to kind of rise up and have a crazy league-leading jersey sale number.
I guess if I had, I would pick the Tigers over the Twins simply because I'd pick Ty Cobb over Kirby Puckett or Harmon Killebrew. I'm just, in terms of the history of the team and going back, the Tigers have a storied history. The Twins have a very good history, and they're a winning team. So that's why their fans are passionate and why they belong in the discussion. The Tigers support that team, and they've been bad for a long time.
And that's what hurts.
I like that they show up, though.
But you're seeing that affect them now.
Yes.
When you see those stadiums, you don't see a ton of people in the stands at those games. Obviously, we don't see anybody there right now, but...
Yeah, except cardboard cutouts, by the way.
And dog abuse, thanks to Willow McNeil getting hit yesterday.
Oh, that was actually very funny. Well, those are our feelings on the top 10 franchises, and I think that'll change. I think we talked about the fan bases will change over time.
If you revisit this in like 10 years, it'll be different, 100%. Thanks for listening. Subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform.
And you can follow us on Twitter at AlmostCoop.